So, let's see if that's working. There we go. Thank you guys for coming out. My name's Ashley Zahorian. I am a filmmaker in the area, and I've had a lot of experience within the church and media and youth ministry. And before anything else, before we dive into media, I really want to talk with you guys more than even about media, about the universal call to holiness that we have, because that's what it really all comes down to. Media is great. We use it. We're going to talk some about media today, media tomorrow, where we're going. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about my story, where I come from, and how media has fit into my life. Come on, there you go. Media has always been a part of my life. My family consumed media constantly growing up. My sister, all the way over there on the side, was a dancer, so she always had music on. My dad was always on his computer working away. He's an electrical engineer, and he was always using media. My mom, growing up, always listened to talk radio, and she is a storyteller at her core. She was a journalist and a photographer and a writer, and I was homeschooled, so a lot of that influenced me. But other than that, she just listened to Rush Limbaugh constantly. So I was always inundated with talk radio growing up. At the same time, often the room over, my brother, also homeschooled, he was a great multitasker, so he always had a TV or movie on. And I was kind of in the middle, sometimes with an additional media source. So when I started prepping for this talk, I realized growing up, I probably spent 12 to 14 hours a day with some form of media on. It was always present, always in my life. Music really is what resonated with me the most. I spent so much time on music growing up. A lot of it was very positive, doing stuff with our church. We had a church band called Cana, and we would do St. Patrick's Day parades, and we just did music stuff constantly. But then there was a lot of other media in my life too. There were the TV and movies that we watched. Very few of them were Christian. It was usually just whatever was on, we would watch. The talk radio. But then I also listened to music just because it was good. You know, I know the message of this is bad, but the music is so good. I can't stand that Christian music. I know I should listen to it, but the secular music just sounds so much better. So I was always inundated. But in the background of all of that, I always felt like I had a call to holiness that just seemed to almost be drowned out, that I was always called toward Christ, and I had this sneaking fear in the back of my mind that if I was called to holiness, it meant one thing for me. I must be called to be a nun. And I wasn't ready for that. So let's just pretend this call to holiness thing isn't going on. I'm going to just do my thing and kind of drown that in the background, because it's fun to play guitar and be in bands and do music and media stuff. And I'm just gonna, you know, I was a good Catholic kid for the most part, went to church. My family was a good family, but I was just also inundated with media, and I was doing all this stuff and not really sure exactly where my life was going, but I kept going. It was really rare in college that you'd ever see me without a guitar or maybe a camera in my hands. Wow, that is kind of bleeding through a little bit. Can you guys hear okay, despite their noise in the background? He's louder than when we did a sound check. Anyway, I always had something going on with media. And like I said, I multitasked. I had TV on, I'd be practicing guitar, I'd be reading a book, I'd be doing all these things at once. And I kind of had trouble hearing God through all of that, believe it or not. That whole God speaks in the silence thing. Well, silence didn't exist in my life. So God led me to something that really makes very little sense in the practical world. I majored in classical guitar and Renaissance lute in college. And I just felt like this is exactly what I had to do. I also majored in media studies, but that was kind of my side major. It was really, I was practicing guitar by the time I graduated for 8 hours a day. And something funny started to happen. I was spending time in silence, because I'm a pretty bad guitarist, actually. So I had to spend a lot of time practicing. So I would be practicing like a scale over and over again. in a quiet little practice room and focusing. And I learned more about prayer through that media than I probably did in any other way. And that's how I could connect with things like being in adoration, because I could learn to be still and listen. So somehow, me with my vast experience in classical guitar, Renaissance lute, and media studies production technology, that fully qualified me to be a youth minister. So I came home and went back to the youth group where actually I grew up in youth group and was the youth minister for 3.5 years. There I saw a lot of the influence of media on youth who really were saturated in media. When I grew up, I didn't have a cell phone. We didn't have broadband internet. We had to fight over our slot of internet for dial-up. And I was so saturated with media. These kids were really saturated in media. So I saw a little bit more of what it's like day to day for kids in this media society. And it's how people connect in so many ways. It was very difficult to ever have a conversation with an adult, but especially a kid, that didn't have something to do with some media reference, something about the movie or the TV show that they just watched, or that band that they're going to see this weekend. It was so media-centric. But I was still creating that media. It was very rare to see me either with kids. I was either with kids all the time, or with a camera, or I got into sound. Spent a lot of time on set with sound. And I almost felt like I was leading a double life between my time at church and with kids and being on set, even though I went to a Christian film school. So it shouldn't seem like that much of a conflict, but I still kind of felt like I was divided. And I think it comes down to one fundamental issue, and it's that call to holiness, that thing in the back of my mind saying, even though I work for a church and I'm going to a Christian film school, something is missing. I haven't found my vocation yet, and I know I'm called to be holy, so I guess that means it's time for me to be a nun, because I still had no concept of holiness outside of a religious order, which is ironic, because if you look at my life growing up, I came from a good Catholic family. My parents had a good marriage. We went to church every Sunday together. We prayed together. We spent time at youth group and doing church bands and choir together. But the ship that holiness could be found outside of religious life or priesthood was still flown by me, sailed on by. So I finally said, okay, God, I'm going to listen. I'll go be a nun. The Dominicans have lots to do with media, and I was doing stuff with the youth group to help them discern, and it helped me discern as we went. They really liked the Dominicans, and so did I, and I figured they do media stuff. If anything, that's got to be it. So I started to actually open up, and through that discernment, they gave me a book to read before going on a discernment retreat. I think it was called My All for Him, and it really talked about that universal call to holiness. And even though it was meant for people discerning religious life, it helped open the door to me that maybe that wasn't where I was called. And again, it's funny because I should have seen holiness in marriage, and I did, but I think I was so saturated in media that it got lost on me. Because everything I was seeing during all that exposure time was that marriage isn't a happy, holy place, because the relationships we see on TV are a far cry from holy, happy relationships, especially marriage. But then there was film too. So it was kind of like film, Dominicans, they play guitar, but I just kind of kept doing film and then kept thinking about Dominicans. And then there was a boy. And ironically enough, I was going to go on this discernment retreat with the Dominicans. And I was on this whole trip was going to happen. It was going to be great. I was going to go with 4 other girls who were discerning religious life. We were going to drive to Nashville together. Then for various reasons, they all drop out at the last minute. God still provided, and somebody gave me a flight to be able to get there. I sent out an email to people to get just a ride back from the flight. And a certain guy said, I'll give you a ride. It was just a friend at the time, and he picked me up from the airport. When I went on that retreat, it was like going to Disneyland. It was a magical, magical place with those Dominicans. It was just amazing being able to spend that much time in prayer and being with such a wonderful environment, but it was Disneyland for me. It was somewhere you visit and leave. It wasn't where I felt like I was being called. But that opened the door. Me being open to God opened the door. And yes, this has to do with media. I just really can't let go of this point that something that's lost for so much of our culture is a sense of vocation and a sense of a call to holiness. And that holiness is a calling for all of us. And our vocation works with that calling. It leads us to holiness. Whether we're called to be priests, religious, married, single, we are called to holiness in a relationship with God. And that gets lost. And that's a lot of why I'm passionate about media, because I see media as a large cause to that, but also what can be a large part of the solution. So once I finally opened the door, it wasn't long before, come on, this thing is not working for me, before we got married. And we did a rock band at our wedding. I know it's kind of tough to see the screen with all the light, but media didn't have to fall away. I also had this sneaking suspicion that things were all just going to fall apart as soon as I got married and I would just not be making films anymore. And in fact, the day of Claire, who's back there, her due date, I was on set shooting video. She was there with me when I was doing script work. Dominic, my son, was in my belly on a Discovery Channel show last summer, and we're still doing this stuff, and God just has multiplied the time and made it possible. And it's pretty amazing to me that it happened. But then it also opened up a new chapter for me of looking at how media influences young children. I do not do things with young kids. Like, high school was a stretch for me. Middle school was really scary. So until I had kids, like, I'd never changed a diaper. And in fact, I don't think I did the first 2 weeks of our daughter's life because my husband Raymond changed all the diapers and I had to learn these things. But I saw with these young kids how much media is an influence. They love it. They cherish storytelling. Storytelling, film, music, dancing. It's just so much a part of their lives. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think it just shows how much power we can get from that. When we look at Second Vatican Council, Lumen Gentium, chapter 5, deals with this a bit, about our call to be part of evangelism. As the faithful, living truly in the world, but not of it, we get to be an example. And I see it with how we raise our kids and all of our experiences. And we can't forget that as we look at media. So sorry to give you a little bit of a longer testimonial there, but I think it's important to see where I come from, of why media has an impact on my life, and to keep our focus on our call to holiness when we look at, well, anything, but especially media. So I want to talk a little bit about the power of media. An article just came out in Binghamton University's magazine for the quarter with the cover story of why we not love, but need stories. Think about the history of storytelling. Since the beginning of time that we know of, people have been telling stories, and it was usually with oral tradition, ballads being sung, stories being told. Then as the written word was developed, stories were recorded. And it was still an elite form for the most part. You had to be pretty wealthy and pretty well educated to read. It was valued. Today, think about where we get stories. Yes, it's books and the stories we tell, but our media surrounds us. Every advertisement tells a story, even if it's in 30 seconds. You're told a story about a product. You're told a story in a TV show. You're told a story in a song. We live on stories. They're powerful. Think about the parables Jesus used. I told you guys there'd be some participation in this. What's a favorite parable that you have? Anybody? Favorite parable? Good Samaritan. Great parable. One we hear over and over and over again, the story of the Good Samaritan, because we learn through stories. We learn how to treat others with compassion, regardless of who they are, through the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus could have just said, treat everybody well, regardless of if they're the same creed as you are, and regardless of their stature. But he didn't. He told a story to drive home the point. So the stories are good. It's how we form our minds. It's our moral conscience, how Christ forms us. And it's how we form our kids. It's a lot of how we learn empathy, or it's a tool that can be used that way. When you look at a story, it's really tough for us to imagine what was it like to travel across the continents on a sailboat. But you could watch a movie about it and get a little bit more of that experience. We can have empathy for people of other cultures, other times, other places through filmmaking. And it's a way to foster creativity. When used properly, I do have to clarify that or quantify that, qualify that, that was the word I was looking for, that too much media can really squelch creativity because it doesn't leave your mind room to develop creatively, but it can also be fodder for creativity. Something cool to think about. Many of us dream in story-like ways. Just about all of us dream in story-like ways. In fact, we usually dream in story-like ways for 2 hours every night. When you add that up, it's 51,000 hours for an average human, or 6 years of your life straight through is spent dreaming in a story-like manner. We have daydreams throughout the day. The average daydream of a person is 14 seconds, and 2,000 of those a day. So you're talking about half of your waking hours in fantasy. We've got to shape these stories, because again, looking back, I had the great family, but the stories that my mind was weaving in my fantasy world were not about the great holy marriage that can exist. It was what I was seeing on TV, even though my parents were right in front of me. Our fantasies get shaped by media, and they're out there. Whether they're in our kids' lives, our lives, or the people we work with and our kids go to school with, people are influenced by this stuff. Film, in many ways, is one of the most powerful storytelling mediums on the market right now, film and television. Especially film, because you go into a dark theater. It's really very dreamlike. Think about it, you go to a dark room. You've got something very similar to a dream being projected, a story that has everything cut out of it. And then you're given somebody's philosophy on life through that movie. It's kind of a back door that can sneak philosophy in, if you really think about it. If you want to make a point about something going on in today's culture, let's just make something up for a second that's a non-issue. Let's say we really, really, really hate the color blue, and we want to get rid of the color blue out of all society. We could do it with modern life, or we could make it be about a planet in the distant future and another time. Taking it out of this element opens the door for people. You look at this with topics like abortion. We could talk about abortion in today's society, and we could have the girl next door who got pregnant, and is an abortion the answer for her and her unplanned pregnancy? Or she could be a Martian living in 2020, well, it's too close. Let's say 3020, and in a completely different universe, and it's a totally different situation. And people who are completely for abortion may just listen to that message, because it's not knocking right at their door. One of the first rules of storytelling is if you want to address a social issue, put it in a different planet, in a different time, different place. Lets our guard down, yeah? You laugh because it's true, don't you? C.S. Lewis, wrote over and over and over again, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is not just a Christ analogy, but Christian themes are throughout. And people can watch The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and learn more about Christianity than a lot of, just Christ films that are out there today. Just throwing it out there. It's an experience, often a shared experience, to watch a movie or TV. Like I said, all those kids who talk about the show they watched the night before, those experiences are meaningful to them. And they're shared. So it's a cultural tie. I could see a big difference for a variety of reasons between, little boy, he'll get fed in a second, between kids who are homeschooled and didn't watch TV, and those who were public schooled and watched TV, or really just forget the homeschool public school, those who watched a lot of TV versus those who didn't. Some of it was positive, most of it was negative, but there were different ways to communicate. So we can't kind of hide ourselves away and just say the solution is never watch TV, because most of the world is watching a lot of TV. So we have to at least know how to communicate in the same language, and it really is becoming a language. I work right now on a show that is shooting antique car restoration reality television. It's very exciting stuff. They spend about 1,000 hours on each car. By the time you watch the TV show, we put 2 cars in an episode, and the episode is 43.5 minutes long. We cut out everything that's boring. You know, believe me, watching a 30-second montage of metalwork on a car is a lot more exciting than filming it for 6 months. That's how long some of these cars take in metalwork. And it's a really fun show. But that's what makes film so seductive. You cut out all the fat. You're seeing just the essential elements of story. When you look into a mirror, you're seeing the beautiful, not necessarily all of the defects that are in real life. And it bridges that gap between philosophy and mass media, that's a way we can get some philosophy and religion to people who might otherwise never get it. Something that really strikes home for me is transcendence. Transcendence, the feeling of being taken out of oneself, is kind of a good working definition. You could find a lot of different ones. A lot of people seek their transcendent experiences not through relationship with Christ, where we find authentic transcendence, but through film. We can't neglect that point when we look at film. You look at Avatar, and the success of Avatar. If you really break that film down, it's a guy transcending his physical form through technology, that he's using technology to get into another body. And actually in that film, he kind of bullies the god of that people, so he also transcends by going above their god. You know how popular that film was? You guys remember when Avatar came out? And there were issues with people, you know, falling into depression because Avatar isn't real. It shows the need for transcendence in people's lives. And we can do something powerful with transcendence in Christian media by pointing toward God and authentic transcendence. With all of this media out there, this is one of the great analogies I just heard. We're all talking about junk food recently, you know, genetically modified stuff. We want to get rid of it. Don't eat too much junk food. It's pretty popular right now to try to eat more healthy. We need to look at our storytelling the same way. If our storytelling is a steady diet of advertising and shows that really, you know, it's just kind of mindless, mind-numbing stuff in the background and not good quality stories, we get numbed. We've got to cut some of that out. So watch what you consume, but also we got to watch what we produce. So I'm going to talk about media today. It is quiz time. All right. In 2005, what do you guys think was the most popular show among 9 to 12-year-olds? SpongeBob, Malcolm in the Middle, Desperate Housewives, or Saturday Night Live? Malcolm in the Middle? SpongeBob? Desperate Housewives. 9 to 12-year-olds, the show they're watching more than any other show in 2005 was Desperate Housewives. Yeah, that one surprised me when I looked that up. Okay, kids who have TVs in their bedrooms. 54% have TVs in their bedrooms. Now think about those 54% of TVs in their bedrooms. How many of those kids do you think watch something different when their parents are out of the room? Actually 44%, which surprised me. But a quarter of those, they're immediately switching to MTV as soon as their parents go out of the room. And they have TVs in their bedrooms. Think about that. All right. How many violent acts are in Saturday morning cartoons per hour? Any guesses there? I think I heard it 20 to 25. Primetime TV has 3 to 5, which is interesting. Primetime TV normally gets the rap of, oh, it's okay, the violence is on after the kids go to bed. No, violence is on during Saturday morning cartoons. And there are tons of studies out that I'm not going to dive into about how watching violence influences kids. I see it in my daughter. She got a hold of the 80s TV show Godzilla, little animated show. She thought it was really fun to chase her friends around and play monster. That's great in a 3-year-old. That show got cut off very quickly. Daily media exposure for kids 8 to 18 in 2009. 7.5. 7 hours and 38 minutes to be exact. 7.5 hours. It's a full-time job. Full-time job. The breakdown of that. And you can see from 1999 to 2009 how much this went up. 4.5 hours of TV, 2.5 hours of music, an hour and a half on their computer, an hour and 13 minutes on video games, 38 minutes on print, which is down. It used to be 43. 25 minutes watching movies. If you count multitasking, where they're doing more than one thing at once, 10 hours and 45 minutes of exposure. We cannot pretend that our kids are not getting exposed, and if they're not, their friends are. And the people who are getting this exposure are the people who are going to be working and influencing our church tomorrow. So we can't neglect this, and we can't pretend it doesn't exist. We have to address it as Christians. Advertising influence. This is a fun one. 13 to 17-year-olds see an average of 35 minutes of advertising minutes a day. So think about all that TV they're watching, and you know what funds TV? Advertising. There was a fun study done where they took elementary school kids and showed a control group a clip of Home Alone. That was just a normal clip of the movie. And then a clip where Macaulay Culkin drinks Pepsi. Then they put the groups of kids in a room with Coke and Pepsi. The control group, is like half and half who drank Coke and Pepsi. The group that saw the clip of Macaulay Culkin drinking Pepsi significantly drank more Pepsi than Coke. So just product placement in TVs. Kids imitate. Kids imitate. That advertising that spends money, advertising for things that are supposed to be for 17 and up, 80% of R-rated movies have advertising targeted directly at kids under 17. 70% of restricted video games are targeted for kids under 17. 100% of music with explicit content is advertised at kids under 17. We can't ignore it. Something that is positive to see, as advertising got cracked down on for smoking, smoking went down among kids. You see, if we kind of average it out around maybe 30% between the different grades in 1991 of high schoolers smoking, who smoked a cigarette in the past 30 days, about 30%-ish overall. Whereas it went down, 2005, we're looking at like 20-25%. It went down, it does have an effect, and of course there's more that goes into it. I don't want to boil it down to just, ads are reduced. But it shows that when a culture makes up its mind to change something, we can change the culture. Cigarettes have been cracked down on, and it shows in what's happening with our kids. When we talk about sexual content on TV, and I know I'm going through a whole broad spectrum at once, but I think we've got to realize what is going on. About 60 to 65% of all shows have sexual content in them. And when those shows are on, it's about 4.4 scenes per hour. Only 50% of acts shown or discussed are between couples in any kind of committed relationship. I couldn't find a statistic for how many of those are married, but that's just any kind of committed relationship. I feel like I've heard a statistic before that it's only like 5% are between married couples, but I don't know that statistic for a fact. I couldn't dig it up when I was putting this together. I do know that 10% of those acts are between people meeting for the very first time. And then this came off of a government website that 10 to 15% show any kind of responsibility or any positive view of abstinence until marriage. Most of that is something like use a condom, STD issues. It's not wait till you're married. But they just grouped it all as any kind of negative consequences like unplanned pregnancy or STDs. So for any kind of Catholic view of sexuality, we're looking at a very, 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 very teeny percentage shown. Now, how much does this influence our kids? When kids are making decisions teenagers in the United States are making decisions about their sexual choices, 62% say they use the advice of their doctors, and 60% say that they use the advice of television. I couldn't find how many of them said that their faith or parents have anything to do with it, but you look at 60% are using television as some kind of a guide, and we can see that because 46% of teens lose their virginity before they leave high school. There have been some studies done also on the effects of watching TV and movies on marriage. That people who are married, who watch a significant amount of television, start to compare their relationships more. And there are more instances of infidelity among heavy viewers of television than those who don't heavily view. And I'm sure there's a lot of other factors that go into that. I didn't go deep into that study because there's too much that play there, but it is telling that there's a correlation, for whatever reason, between heavy television viewing, especially of romantic things, and things like The Bachelor are considered romantic, and infidelity and divorce. What was that? Yeah. I want to contrast all of those statistics with faith today, because I do think there's a big correlation when you look at the time we spend in front of media and what our faith life is like. I used Catholics because there's more data on Catholics. This was a 2012 study from Pew. 24% of Catholics attend Mass weekly. So less than a quarter of Catholics in the United States attend Mass weekly. A full 10% of our country, a tenth, 1 out of every 10 people is a fallen away Catholic, someone who was Catholic and has fallen away. 39% of all Americans say they attend one church service a week. That was a 2005 Pew study. On that same study, 91% said they watch at least 1 hour of television daily. So compare that exposure time. It's really tough to study how much time people spend in prayer or reading the Bible to get those reports. But you can imagine if only 39% of Americans are going to church once a week, and we know 91% are watching at least an hour or more of TV because we can monitor that a day, an hour or more a day, we're looking at, for most Americans, probably very little influence from anything faith-based on their lives, but a lot of influence from media. So, have I hammered home how important this is yet? Something that gets confused a lot, I think, is that Hollywood just has a destructive agenda. I hear this among Christians a lot. Maybe not you guys, but I do hear Hollywood just wants to, sell sex and violence. No, Hollywood just wants to sell anything. I want to be very clear. It's a big industry. We've got a little over $60 billion of US revenue from film and television. And most successful media, there are two elements to media to make it successful. One is a good story that's well done. The other one is a business plan, because media is a business. It's not just something that happens. That great, this inspiring moment, and then I got my friends together with a camera and we went in the backyard and shot this masterpiece. Doesn't happen. There is a full detailed plan behind not only how the film will get made, but how it will be distributed and advertised. Without that, it's wonderful if you somehow manage to get some friends to pitch in some money and make a masterpiece movie, but what are we doing to influence our culture if you and those friends are the only ones who watch it? We have to actually get this stuff out there. Marketing and distribution is a huge part of filmmaking. Recent Christian movies, here's a little bit of good news. And I put numbers up here since we know Hollywood's driven by numbers. Heaven is for Real just opened up Thursday, number 2 opening. It had a pretty decent production. I haven't seen it yet or read the book. I know I need to do this. But it had a pretty decent production budget for the kind of movie it was. It had a $12 million production budget. It already made $59 million. So it's doing pretty well. That's a pretty good return on investment for some people. Son of God, out a little over a month, that grossed $67 million. I couldn't find the production budget. Medea's Family Reunion, Tyler Perry comedy. That one had a $6 million production budget and it grossed $63 million. I wanted to put these here because I know they had realistic budgets for what they were. Medea's Family Reunion is a comedy without a lot of name actors. It's not going to have a gigantic budget. Son of God, I'm not sure what that budget was, but I know the people who made it, not personally, but they're real producers, so I know it probably had a real budget. 24 million? Yeah, so still, it's already grossed over twice its investment. Huh? I didn't look up Noah. I should have done that, but I left that one out, so I can't say. Nice, 290 million gross, cost 120 million? Yeah, and that, I haven't seen it. I've heard lots of things about it. I have young kids, so I don't get out to see movies often, but I've heard the big coup of Noah was its advertising strategy. I see some agreement. This is something that was really interesting to me. Avatar, top grossing PG-13 movie, and we talked about that before. $237 million budget, gross $2.7 billion. So not a Christian film, and even though most people would consider it clean, I'd actually say it's one of the more dangerous films because of the pantheistic philosophy that it puts out there, and transcendence through basically dominating God. But that's another issue. I would say that's a thing to look at, yeah.
But is this, when you look at these numbers, is this ticket sales? Because a lot of these movies, some of these movies made a lot of money because of products.
Right, this is from box office.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are box office sales, top grossing box office. Passion of the Christ, rated R, which PowerPoint nicely put into a circle for me. Yeah, that one, 30 million, gross 612 box office sales. And that's domestic and international. I love Box Office Mojo. It's a great way. I use it to see how market saturation is happening, because if they're making money, it means people are watching them. It's not just about making money to me, it's how many people are watching these movies. You know, if Passion of the Christ grossed 612 million, a lot of people saw it to make that money. And then, yeah, there's all the marketing and all the other side things, videos. This is just box office sales. But because these films are starting to make money, the top 5 film studios all have Christian film departments. So this is a good thing. We're starting to put our money where our mouth is. Christians are going to see these films. This was brought up in the session before. You know, there's some things we don't all agree with in every Christian film out there, and I know I want to hurt somebody often when I see poor production quality in Christian films, but I'll go see them anyway because I want to give that ticket sale and give that support, even though I really can't stand most of the production value of a lot of Christian films because they're not really putting real budgets and hiring professionals to do them. I still go see it to promote it some. That's changed a little bit since we've had kids, but I try. So that's a little bit about where we are now, the state of the industry of media, if you will. I want to look at what we can do to change this. What can we do with tomorrow? We want to be proactive, not just reactive. It was brought up last session, some stuff like, well, why has media degraded so much? I really feel like the number one reason is money. I mean, we can get into the spiritual warfare behind it too, but the spiritual warfare that has resulted in dollars going to films that are not pro-Christian and don't have Christian values and morals. And there's issues with Christian storytellers. There were several people who were just in here who either themselves or have relatives who have tried to get into Christian media and been burned. And it's a common story. That I tried to do something. Somebody was telling us about how his little brother made a Catholic pro-life film that did really well, was really well done. Couldn't get it aired because people said, you know, for whatever reason, different stations wouldn't air it. Then when he tried to sell it at churches, even some pastors said from the pulpit, or from their announcement, don't worry about buying it, I'll make copies for everyone. That guy won't work in Christian media anymore. And it happens over and over. We get asked to do things for free as professionals because somehow media makes it okay to abuse somebody's work. So a lot of people who are true professionals in media will not touch anything that is labeled Christian because they're going to get every last ounce of productivity squeezed out of them and not get paid for it. We can't do it to people. I got to go straight to the catechism for a second. It's going back to vocation and avocation and our call to holiness. By our baptism, We are called to spread the gospel. We know, especially those of us in this room who just looked at the statistics, media is getting to people. It's getting out there. We've got to spread the message of Christ through it. We cannot ignore it. We're called to exercise the mission which God has entrusted to the church to fulfill in the world in accord with the condition proper to each one. And I think a large part of the reason, in all honesty, that I wasn't called to religious life is because of this avocation. I have a burning passion to make quality movies. If it's going to be for Christ, it needs to be better than secular media. It doesn't need to have this little asterisk. It's okay, it's Christian. Look past the boom and the shot and the bad shadows and the poor lighting and the bad acting and the bad script writing because it's about Christ. It's okay. No, it's not okay. If we're doing something for Christ, it needs to be done with excellence. It's not okay. Continuing on, this is a great responsibility we've been given. Christ sent us out to the world to evangelize. This duty is more pressing when it is only through them, through us, that men can hear the gospel and know Christ. Their activity in ecclesiastical communities is so necessary that for the most part, the apostolate of the pastors cannot be fully effective without it. We are the foot soldiers. And I think it's so fitting that I'm giving this talk at Awakening the Domestic Church, which is probably why Deacon asked me to do it. But we're the foot soldiers. I've worked in a church office for 3.5 years. Our priests are very, very busy with the sacraments, and they need to be. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to make media. And to do it with excellence requires a lot of training and a lot of experience and a whole lot of time. This is our job. This is our mission. For me especially, not everybody is called to work in media, but this is part of my mission. And it's to be that foot soldier and to use media as a tool to do it. I think we're often tempted when we look at the statistics on media and media exposure to just say, well, we're going to cut our kids off from everything. We're going to cut ourselves off. We're going to go live as hermits. But going back to that word, that's a good calling for some people. But for many of us, we're called to be in the world and not of it. We look at Matthew. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. We've got such an opportunity to reach so many people through media. It's ridiculous, and we can't sit back and hide and lose our ability to connect with the world. We need to change the world to be able to connect with us. When we look at processing the media that we consume, and when we look at creating it, one of the big things I like to look at is God's point of view. How is God's point of view illustrated in this? There are great movies out there that are the basic redemption model. Somebody's a sinner, they come to know Christ, they're redeemed, life is good. Unfortunately, that's probably 90% of movies that brand themselves as Christian. Some of the other movies that are just clean movies just show man triumphing without the help of God. I think there are problems in both. The first one, not because there's an inherent problem, but because of the production quality that often goes with that. It's very, very contrived. There's a crucifix with a light on it, and somebody magically now knows Jesus. It's very difficult to show that in a way that's compelling as a storyteller, especially when it's been done so many times. We've got to tell the Christian story in different ways and to address topics and show God's point of view in difficult topics. And it's not always a nice, clean package with a bow on it as soon as you accept Christ. We're still at hard work and in a very real spiritual battle. It's not all smooth sailing. And then some of those movies that we watch just because they're clean, there's a whole crop of them out there where it's okay, there's not a lot of swearing, there's not a lot of violence, there's not explicit sexual content, but the whole point of the movie is man triumphs on his own without God. Those can be destructive too. So I like to look for God's point of view. There's some movies, The Devil's Advocate. Have any of you guys seen that one? Tons of explicit content. Very traumatizing movie. But to me, it's one of the most powerful movies I've seen, just because it shows the real spiritual battle. It's a very secular movie, but it has the devil manipulating people. And I think it shows a lot of more God's point of view than a lot of those kind of just watered down life is okay movies. So something to think about when you're processing movies. How does this show God's point of view? And it's a good thing that if you watch something and you're not sure, discuss it. Don't just watch it and go away. Well, how does this show God's point of view? If Jesus were sitting here watching this movie with me, what do we know of what God would say about this? It's a really good question to ask whenever you're processing, and as especially like helping kids with what they watch, because they're heavily influenced, especially young kids. Look at that. I do have to digress for a second. I meant to tell you guys this story earlier, but I forgot. This shows to me how true this point is. Kids under 7 have a really tough time differentiating between fantasy and reality. I've got a 2.5, almost 3-year-old who is obsessed with horses right now. Everything's about riding horses. Her daddy's back is her horse. We took her to go to a petting zoo and ride a horse, and she just had a blast. She watches a show called Super Y, just a nice PBS show about reading, where there are these kids who jump into books, and the book comes to life, and they explore fairy tale stories. Cute little cartoon. She tries to jump into her books to ride horses. She's got a book with a horse on it, and she tried to climb into the book the other day to ride the horse. She can't tell the difference fully between fantasy and reality, so we've got to be really careful with young minds what they watch. They're not going to be able to tell the difference between God's point of view and analyze it. They're only going to know what they're seeing. When they get older, then we can start discussing how does this fit in with our Christian faith? What does this tell us about the world? Being in the world but not of it, we can't just hide under a bush. We've got to explore these topics and see what people are looking at out there. Back to the junk food thing, balance of time and quality. By no means do I think all media is bad. I work in it constantly, but we have to have a balance. We have to have the quiet time with Christ. It's not a replacement. The name of my production company is something like Real Pictures, because film is an image. We're pointing to the reality. And that's something I always try to remind myself of. We're pointing to the reality of Christ. And getting quality stories. Good stories feed the soul. Commercials tend to not. And a lot of my goal is to change the culture. I want people to watch my movies and go, I'm sorry, I'm an atheist, but that movie is so good, I can't help but watch it. The story is so compelling and that cinematography is so amazing. Whatever they would say to watch it, I want it to be so good that it's better than anything out there secular, so that people who are not Christian want to watch it and we can change the culture. I touched on this a little bit, the idea that creating media is a profession. This is something my husband and I have been processing through lately, not just with media, but with all professions, that our professions, our avocations should really strengthen our vocations. I'm working on a secular production right now, and I do see, I've got an ability to be a little bit of a light there to some extent or other, and I'm learning a lot for when I'm making some other Christian media, but it's still a struggle, because other than this rare circumstance where it's a very understanding production in terms of having kids while you're working, there's nothing uplifting about it. I work in a shop with a bunch of mechanics. You can imagine what the conversation is. People complain that the show has a lot of expletives and dirty jokes that gets aired. You have no idea what we're editing out. It's not the most positive environment. And especially for filmmakers, it's very difficult to find those environments that you could even have a family in, because filmmakers usually work very, very long days when we're making films, so it's very difficult. The Mormons are really good at doing some balanced productions. I worked for a Mormon production once in Williamsburg where families traveled with the crew, and they had people, some of the wives of some of the crew and some of the husbands who weren't involved with the production were watching the kids while things were on set, and there was actually time to spend with your family while we were shooting. So rare, hardly ever seen. And hardly ever seen that not only was it that kind of production, but I actually got paid for showing up. That's very rare in anything Christian. But just an illustration of how long it takes to do this stuff and why it's a profession. I got involved with a production while I was in school, and student animation. I'm not an animator, so it was an adventure, but I ended up directing this animation that's won several awards now, and actually any day now we'll find out if it is a finalist for a Student Academy Award. It's been selected, so pretty decent project, but student quality animation. I did the math, and it took at least 6.8 hours of time to make a second of animation. And that was a student animation, student quality. The show I'm on now, Phantom Works, these cars that we're following, they're antique cars that are getting restored. It's about 1,000 man-hours of mechanics working on the cars per car. We boil that down to 2 cars per 43.5-minute episode, but we're filming a whole lot that gets cut down. It's almost a year-round crew on that show. And this is probably the lowest budget reality TV show you'll ever see because it's it's almost documentary because we're actually following cars that go. Most car reality shows are staged, but ours is actually pretty real. But it's a lot of work. I mean, I'm there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, and I'm pretty much one of the people who spends the least amount of time later. Our director has not gone from work and just home, I think, this entire season. And he's there pretty much 7 days a week. I'm there 5 days a week. He's working constantly. And I don't really take a lunch break. I do all my reports at lunch so I don't have to do it when I get home. But it's a profession. I don't have time for much else while this show is shooting. I think we fall short a lot of times as Christians when we expect, oh, it's the arts. You should do this for love of the art. I get calls pretty regularly where people have some passion project that they want me to do for free. Oh, there's this cause coming up. We want to do a promo video for it. And I ask, what's your budget? Silence. Budget? You mean it costs money to do this? I thought you just magically touched a couple buttons and pulled out a camera and a video popped out. It takes a lot of work to do professional quality media. It takes a lot of work to do any media, but to do professional media, it's not only the time you spend, but the people who are trained doing it. So just kind of a little thought about what it takes to do this stuff. So what we're working toward is really having a professional environment where people can work, have families, and support their vocation and their call to holiness, and make some good quality media that can change the culture. We've partnered with Shalom TV for this conference, and they're shooting, and it's so great to see other people doing this. We have to partner together more to make things happen. I've never heard of them, no offense, Shalom Media guys, until they contacted me because they're an Indian station that's now getting started worldwide. So now the English station is starting, but we need more of this. We need more of it, and they're professional people, so like my emails got returned because they're people working in an office. I'm pretty slow right now on things just because I'm working really for Discovery Channel and doing stuff on the side. I look forward to, after Phantom Works, being able to really work in Christian media full time. But, just period, for me to do it, I often, on Christian projects, end up only making enough to pay someone to watch our kids while we're working. And I can't do that anymore. And I won't ask other people to do it either. They've got to be able to actually, follow Catholic social teaching and give people a fair wage for fair work. But anyway, some of what we're trying to do in that professional environment, Deacon Darrell has a relationship with a couple of dioceses in Africa specifically, but then also just around the country of the United States, where formation is just non-existent. People are hungry to get Catholic formation, and one of the things we plan on doing is about 250 to 300 formation talks that small groups could meet in their homes to watch and then discuss, because you really don't get formed from a TV screen, but it gives you good, if you have no one else to be able to come and sit with you and actually go through things, it's a good way to get something going, and then they'd have discussion questions to work with. That's one of the projects we're working on that we'll probably do pretty soon, because that's a much cheaper production to do. It doesn't cost a whole lot to do talks on tape, just by the nature of the production, but it does still cost something. One of the other big things are films. We've got plans for several feature films. My mom and I are actually writing a script right now that I'll tell you guys about in a few minutes, that hopefully we'll be shooting in the next couple of years. And that's something that would go, to the Regals and the Cinemax and all those places and then doing television, starting with on-demand television, on Hulu's and Hulu kind of style stuff, ABC Go, that kind of television instead of a 24-hour station, but with Catholic entertainment. I'm going to be honest with you, when I come home after a day of work and playing with my kids for a couple of hours and they're finally asleep and we want to watch a show to unwind, we're not going to watch any of the talks recorded at this conference or any talk on formation. We're going to watch a silly sitcom that helps us unwind and relax. It'd be really nice if that silly sitcom could be Catholic instead of something that we have to kind of screen the content on. Then we're also working on just a Catholic business center. That's an environment where not just media professionals can work, but like my husband works for the Knights of Columbus and has a field insurance business, basically, his own business under the Knights of Columbus. And we know people who are lawyers and doctors to just all actually work together and have a place where we can be in somewhat community, but be professionals. And part of that would also have some kind of school daycare facilities so that when people do need to drop their kids off, either people who work there or people who are visiting, like you have a meeting with your lawyer, and Catholic families tend to be big. It's kind of tough sometimes to go meet with a professional when you have a lot of kids with you, if there's a place where your kids could go and play while you're at that meeting. So that's some of the stuff we're kind of working on. Some of those projects I wanted to highlight. We're working on 10 short films that would be things that could air on different TV networks. They'd be about 30 minutes long, a little less than that, so there's room for advertisement. The big thing we're looking at is real looks at the priesthood right now. That's kind of the kick I'm on, you could say, of looking at discernment and what is the priesthood really like? We've got so much negative publicity. What can we do that's positive? So we have a script we've written called Peter's Call, where 3 young men get in a car accident when they're graduating high school. One of them, who plans on being a priest, dies in that accident. And the other 2 friends ultimately go on to become priests, but one of them knows it immediately, and that car accident is the impetus for him realizing what he needs to do. The other has a very long and twisted path through some pitfalls to get there. But it's a film that would be in kind of a non-narrative Crash style, like Crash and I'm blanking on some of the other names, 21 Grams, some of that non-narrative film style. Yeah.
Fishers of Men?
Yes. Yeah, Fishers of Men is a great example of something that's doing so much good. I have the statistics on how well it did, but I don't know them off the top of my head. Fishers of Men made a huge impact. Grassroots, I think?
Yes.
Grassroots did it?
Everything they touch.
Yeah, but you see the difference, what quality media does. And what this would be, that's more of kind of a documentary on the priesthood, which is great and powerful. I'm going to show you guys a short documentary on adoration that I did in a little bit here. But it's powerful. We need more of that. I want to partner with them more in the future. This would be really a narrative fictional story. Well, somewhat fictional. It actually is based off of an experience that one of the guys who helped write it had with some of his friends and what a car accident did to shape their lives. So there's some rooted in reality. But yeah, grassroots media is doing great work. They get the professional media. The film I'm writing with my mom, it's called Sins of the Father. And that's about a young man who is born into a mafia family. And when he realizes what his dad really does for a living, and he's going to be part of something he cannot condone if he does not run away, runs away, and he ends up getting taken in by a priest running a shelter for boys. He has to go into essentially witness protection, but he finds his vocation as a priest. And then a whole bunch of stuff happens where his sister ends up coming to him for shelter, and he has a final confrontation with his father. But it's about him overcoming the sins of his family. But we chose Sins of the Father because people in secular media will think it's about the sins of a priest. Tricky title there, you see what we did? So my mom is doing the first draft of that, and she's about 90 pages in. The goal is when I'm done with Phantom Works in October, I'll go through and hit second draft. But my days usually look like I get in the car, pray a decade of the rosary, drink my breakfast, because I drink a shake on the way in, then I throw my headset on, and my mom and I talk story for 10 minutes. I get to set. At lunch, I pack a lunch, and then I work on either some Catholic films or doing my reports for the show. On the way home, I usually call somebody else, either lately it's been Deacon Daryl about this conference, but somebody about whatever other projects we have going on. But anyway, that one is coming around. One that I really think we're gonna pull off the ground soon, so keep an eye out for this, and if you guys know anybody who would be good for it, please let me know. We wanna do a reality TV station called Discernment House. Discernment House would take place at the Outer Banks in a beach house. I have a few I've found that I think would work quite nicely, where we have 12 people, probably college students who have the summer off, 6 who are guys, 6 who are girls that obviously have separate wings of the house, who are discerning vocations. And really a very real world kind of entertainment reality TV station. We're following their journeys over 40 days as they are on kind of an extended retreat, but also a boot camp. We're gonna, we'll find all the tricks that reality TV does. We're gonna find out, okay, we've got a contestant who's afraid of heights. We need to do a high ropes and initiatives course to see how they handle that kind of stress and how they bond with their other, we'll contrive some situations. One of the plans is we're gonna partner up pairs of people, sending them out 2 by 2, have 2 guys who are discerning the priesthood, and we partner them up with a local pastor so that they can really see what it's like day-to-day life of a priest, and we're following it on camera. 2 of the young ladies who are discerning religious life, we've got a couple of local orders. There's some Dominicans who are here and teaching in a school that will partner them up with a Dominican, and they'll have kind of their work assignments. This is where I really like this in terms of formation. What we want to do is get 2 things out of this show. There'd be the pure entertainment-based show that hopefully will go on different networks and also be available, on-demand streaming. That's really just entertainment about the relationships and their journeys. But part of what they're going to do on this journey is hear daily talks. And they're going to be in spiritual direction. And we can take those daily talks that they hear from lots of different people. You're talking about 40 days of talks, really probably 80 if we count homilies, because we're going to have them in daily mass, that we can record well. And then if somebody out there watches the show and goes, oh, I think I may be like those people. I didn't realize that it wasn't just fanatic, crazy people who have vocations. I feel that way too, and I relate to that person. They can go online and watch that talk. And then there are discernment groups all over the nation who could use those talks. You're talking about 80 talks. They could spend a year watching those and processing through and having discussion. And we'd have those that would kind of feed into the show. People would watch the talks in their discernment groups and then want to watch the show. People would watch the show and then want to watch the talks. It could feed each other. But that's one, I think, especially with some of the people we have in Hampton Roads who are behind it, or will hope. Yeah, DREs and confirmation groups. There's just, why can't I watch a show like Discernment House to fall asleep to instead of Once Upon a Time? Not that there's, again, I don't want to slam a lot of stuff, but just, we could have some shows, or I'll go ahead and do one, I'll slam Real World on MTV. I don't even know if the show still exists. But why can't we watch some of these shows? And we've got a whole list of shows we want to do. Those are just kind of 3 of the ones I wanted to highlight for you guys of some projects we're working on, since I was supposed to talk about partnership ways. One of the things we're doing is just building a network of filmmakers. We've got, actually, one of my old students, James, is back here recording this talk. I taught at Regent for a while. I probably will again at some point when I'm not too busy with filmmaking and kids. But we got to grow this network. And it has to be a professional network so that we actually get this stuff out there. So it's kind of some thoughts. I want to show you guys one example of just a short video we did. We actually shot this the week before I got married. I had a deadline for a class, and we were able to squeeze 2 projects out of one. We were doing a short video on somebody's journey. It was a poem project for the class, and we used a poem from St. Faustina. But to do it, we had to shoot some people in adoration. And then we had these people in adoration who are dynamic speakers, so we put them in front of a camera and asked them some questions and made a small documentary out of it. So just want to kind of show you guys that as an example. I have no idea where the lights are, but you can see something of it, and then we'll kind of have a little question and answer time.
The reason I go to adoration is because it's time for me to spend with God and God to spend with me. It's like being in love. I just sit there, I look at him, he looks at me, and it's hard for me not to want to be in the face looking at the face of the person I'm in love with. I think everyone understands that. If you've ever been in love, you'll love adoration.
When you're in love with someone, you want to spend a lot of time with them. And adoration is like that. God is just so in love with you. He invites you to come spend time with him. And when you do, you feel that love, and it's indescribable.
In adoration, we have the opportunity to adore the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And it is in the Eucharist that we find our home.
Adoration's been so important in various times of my life. It's just been a real great time for me to just be able to be in Christ's presence and worship him and be able to just be in quiet, be in peace, and really be able to listen to him.
That's a meeting place of God. That's you and God right there, right in that room.
You are all unified as one body through the Eucharist.
In adoration, the priest will put the Eucharist, the consecrated Eucharist, body and blood, soul and divinity of Jesus Christ, in a monstrance. And the monstrance comes from the word monstrare, which means to expose. So in the monstrance, we have the chance to have Christ's true presence exposed to us so that we have the opportunity to worship him and be with him. And it makes sense because in the beginning, God created us to be in fellowship with him. And so, as St. Augustine once said, you have created us, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And so it makes sense for us to be, without peace in our lives until we go into the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, until we are face to face in fellowship with Christ as we were created to be. So it is a great opportunity for us to go. Christ gives us blessing and healing, among other things.
Adoration is extremely important in my life. I try to go as often as I can because my work is very stressful, and adoration is the only time that I can be completely at peace and know that even when I'm stressing at work, that someone suffered much more, and he's there, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. And I go to adoration to visit and find consolation.
I try to spend an hour every day in front of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament as my personal prayer time, and every day I'm bringing to him my issues, but also I bring to him my issues and he gives me answer to those issues, but also to things that I don't even see that are way on my peripheral. So more than even the things that I'm concerned about, he brings to mind things that I need to be concerned about.
I would really suggest spending that time with Christ in the Eucharist and just really valuing the time of silence, but also being willing to listen to what he has to say, and sometimes that just means letting him pour out his love.
Bishop Fulton Sheen once said, one of my favorite heroes of my life, the greatest love story of all time is contained in a tiny white host.
There comes a time in people's lives when they realize that there's something missing, something they need, like a sense of purpose in their life, and they realize that thing that's missing is really God.
So that's what I have for you guys. That was just a little example of something we've done that I almost kind of slid in a production on that one. But yeah, do you guys have any questions or thoughts? That's my little girl. It's on my YouTube, and I can shoot me an email. This is one of those things that if you want a copy of it to like show at your church, it was a slid-in production, so send me an email. And it's on our YouTube. It's youtube.com/slrpictures, and our regular website's on there.
How do you find trying to meet the demands of a Catholic audience that has such a broad range in prayer style, worship style, catechetical style? You know, it's it's the whole world, right? From every range possible. So how do you try to reach out to that audience?
I don't. In all honesty, no, I target a specific audience. That was targeted for young adults. Young adults who would go to adoration. I found more often than not, you're better off targeting a specific audience instead of trying to make it something for everyone. Because when it's something for everyone, usually no one cares. So you look at even regular films, and this is part of that business plan. Every film starts with a business plan. You look at your primary audience, your secondary audience, and your tertiary audience. For this one, primary audience was Catholic young adults who somebody is going to invite to adoration. And they say, oh, you should come to adoration with me. And that person says, what's adoration? Let me show you this video. That's my first audience. Second audience would be like high school kids. Third audience would be Catholic adults, but I didn't try to make it something to everyone, and that's really how I address that. The catechetical videos we would do of those talks would be meant primarily for Catholic charismatic communities of 6 who are trying to mentor young couples. Very specific thing. That they may be used by more than that, but we just don't try to cater to everybody. What we do, absolutely, is make sure that it adheres to basic Catholic teaching. Because there's lots of kind of rooms, you could say, in our Catholic house, but we always have to be on that page. Yeah. And then everybody has their different style within that. But I just gave up that fight a long time ago, trying to make it something for everyone. Any other questions or thoughts?
Is there any thought to, I mean, because you're not the only one trying to do this, like grassroots ideas,
Yeah.
Is there any thoughts of collaboration?
Absolutely. There are thoughts of collaboration, and Raymond and I were just talking about this before this conference. We have to collaborate more. There are thoughts of collaboration, but not a lot of action right now, and I can fault myself for that as much as anyone else. We'd love to collaborate. I need to just pick up the phone and call. I'm going to use Shalom as an example again. They somehow found us online, probably just searching for conferences coming up, and they called me. That's what it took. Actually, I think it started with an email, and then we chatted, and look, the conference is getting recorded and is going to be broadcast. We have to pick up the phone and talk. Even looking at this conference, you know, there was a target for more people to come. Whatever happened, we've got the number we have, but a lot of it was just a lack of picking up the phone and calling individuals. We want to do a spoof video on what if Jesus relied on bulletins and have a Jesus character who is just putting flyers in bulletins and putting up posters and saying like Sermon on the Mount this way and not inviting anyone personally. And what would happen? He'd be sitting on the beach by himself, and that's what we're going to do in the video. Looking at his phone, posting it on Facebook. We have to individually reach out, and so it's me picking up the phone and individually calling grassroots and saying, let's work together. And I haven't done that yet just because of what I have going on with Phantom Works, but I do think that speaks to something that happens so often. We get so compartmentalized in our ministries and forget that there are other people trying to do the same thing. It's one of the things.
Different people have different strengths.
Yes.
So like, you might have a strength in reaching out to a young adult audience, whereas like, grassroots reaches out to people who are concerned, like, a lot of what they do reaches out so much to people who might be, struggling with.
Yeah. That was grassroots reaches out to. Yeah. Yeah, we all have our different avenues, and that addresses getting, how do we reach everybody? We don't. But we could work together and play with our strengths, and we just have to pick up the phone and do it. We have to do more conferences like this where we're actually talking to each other and seeing what each other does, and we need to pick up the phone and meet with people. Yeah.
So how do you promote that paradigm shift that it will take to help Catholics understand that this is worth the investment? Because it certainly does cost a lot of money, yet we're not seeing that kind of money budgeted for this movement.
Was that, how do we do it?
Yeah, like how do we promote that, say, at our various different levels?
I think for me, this is one of those places where Deacon Darrell has an agenda he's working on, and that's really donation-based talks on tape. And to me, my agenda is this is an investment and it's a business. There's a lot of things in the United States for tax advantages for filmmaking because those numbers of the budget of how much filmmaking costs and how much revenue it brings in, the government wants films to be made here because it's a lot cheaper to make films in other countries. So there's a lot of tax advantages. It's actually a really good investment to make in film if you do it the right way, because even if the film flops, you're likely to get a tax break on what you invested. So a lot of it comes down to that business plan. Most of the Christians I know trying to make movies have a story, but they don't have a business plan. And it's talking to people who are looking for tax breaks. Like in any business, it's looking for investors. And I think that gets missing a lot because people do try to do it all off of crowd fundraising of, oh, if everybody pays $10, we'll get there. That is great for some things, and that probably is how we'll do like the talks on tape, because there really isn't much of a profit in those. It really is a ministry donation of, we see this needs to be done, we know it's not going to make any money, but the films I want to do, I want them to make money because it means they're being seen and they're entertainment based. So that's why I'm looking at a lot of investor based stuff. And what it is once we've got, we have a business plan together, a prospectus done for Peter's Call, that will probably get shown to some investors pretty soon. But that's kind of step one for money-making films, is getting investors. And I just see it as doing it the way the film model works. There's a reason why Hollywood exists. I don't see a need to change that because it's Christian. And people could still make money because it is a business. And then there's kind of the donation-based stuff. Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Yeah. What's your strategy for marketing? I mean, and you mentioned it before, there are several film companies out there that are doing Christian films, but they are evangelical Christians that are doing it. And most of them, what they get is the actual church, they get a pastor behind them, and then because they give the 10% of the earnings, that's how they raise the money to do the film. And they do have people, that's why 21st Century Fox opened the Christian department. But it's not for Catholics, it's for Christian films. So there is 64 million Catholics in this country, but are they really contributing to get the education that they want, or we still gonna get it from somebody else? That's how you gonna market it? Because you can get the investors, but how you gonna market it?
Right. The marketing question is big, and that's part of why most of the stuff that I do is secretly Catholic, like Sins of the Father. I don't want people to think it's a Catholic film because of marketing, because they won't pick it up for marketing. Yeah, do what C.S. Lewis did. And right now I'm particularly passionate about films about the priesthood, so I go with what I'm passionate about. So we're working on that film, and I fully anticipate it to be marketed where you think that there's sins of this priest that are going to get uncovered, and I completely plan on that being the marketing strategy. So from day one of starting the script, that is the plan, because no, they don't market Catholic films. And I think, unfortunately, a large part of that is because we don't go to the films. If we're going to films, and creating them, you look at, yeah, I got a company in my garage, yeah. Oh, a couple of them in your garage. It's a tough environment where we have to put our money where our mouth is. Somebody, I think I mentioned it, somebody earlier, and it rang so true to me. They had a younger brother who made what he says was a great Catholic film, and the pastors at churches said, don't worry about buying it, I'll make copies so you guys can still see it. This is why we don't have the money in Catholic filmmaking, because it does cost money. It is a profession. I don't want this to be a sales pitch talk, but I want it to be a realization of what it will take for it to change. And what it takes for it to change are not the phone calls I get almost weekly about, will you come make a free promo video for me? One, I don't have the time. My family is my vocation. My day job, because we need the extra income right now, is working for Discovery Channel on Phantom Works. Filmmaking, while I'm passionate about it, you don't ask somebody to run their restaurant for free for you, although some people may do that. You know, their day job is running a restaurant, or their day job is being a lawyer, and we shouldn't ask those people to do these things for free. And I thought about putting this in, but I was afraid it would go too long. I was looking over Catholic social teaching for this talk. Almost all the points apply to media, both in what we can do to change it, and the fact that so often we expect people who are professionals, who not only have gone to school, but have spent years honing their craft, to just work for free and take that time away from their families, because they still have to feed their families. The guy who was telling me about his younger brother has 7 kids. Those 7 kids have to eat, and it's not off doing a free video. So, yeah, I think it's really putting our money where our mouth is, and we're working on that. Hopefully we'll be working more with grassroots media, with Shalom, with EWTN to some extent. They kind of have a different market. That's why I say to some extent, because that's just, they've got what they do, and it doesn't exactly fit into what I'm trying to fill in a gap on. I really am passionate about Catholic entertainment TV and helping with some of this catechetical whole that has a very specific purpose. It's not just making a catechetical video to throw out there into the void and hope somebody grabs it, but there's a network of communities who are looking for it. That's what says we should do this, because there's 1,000 communities who want it, who want to use it. And they hopefully will actually want to use it enough to give donations to make it happen. That's going to be the next step. But I think we have to wrap up. I see, I've been bad looking at the watch. Yep, 5:10. Yeah, we got to wrap up. But thank you guys so much.